Thank you for joining and thank you for donating your time because when I know you're busy. So
And we all.
I know. I really appreciate it. And for people that don't know, um, this is the Unheard Outsider, which is a new podcast coming through the DEIC at South Puget Sound Community College, hosted by myself, Q. And today we have Parfait Bassalé, who is the new executive diversity officer on campus. And today it's really exciting to really have the conversation around what are the responsibilities of a executive diversity officer or particular any diversity position that are that's serving at the top of the food chain, I like to call it, to really bring about change in the institution. So one of the things is I want to go ahead and have Parfait just give us a brief background about yourself and what did you go to school for and all of those things.
That sounds good. Thank you, Q, for first and foremost having this platform to engage in conversations that are very important for our community, and also for the opportunity to be here as a guest to the show. So a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Benin Republic, where I grew up in between a few countries in West Africa, because my parents used to work for an overseas company, and so every so many years we moved from one place to another. So that really shaped my childhood. And then I moved to the United States some 20 years ago to pursue my higher education. So I went to Portland State University. I have one of those stories where, I wasn't one of those kids who knew from childhood what I wanted to be when I grew up. I kind of had to stumble my way into kind of figure out what my vocation is. And so I first started as a computer engineer for my undergrad. The first 2 years kind of dove in, all hard in, and then ended up switching gear because the right side of my brain, the social science part of my brain, was starving while I was in engineering school. So ended up kind of going to more of a business field, information technology and general management. And then when I completed my dual bachelor's degree in information systems and general management, ended up kind of working for a technology company slash consulting company, helping educational organization, K to 12 mostly, but then also universities, through change management and adopting curriculum mappings, processes. And so that got me close to higher ed in a different way and seeing how change happens within big organizations. And very rapidly, I switched gear from even being kind of an IT person in that company to being kind of an implementation change management specialist, and did that for about a decade. And then while doing that, vocationally, I pursued my master's at Portland State University in the field of conflict resolution, which was very fulfilling for the right side of my brain. I've always been fascinated about human relations and how people interact, how to build bridges, how to de-escalate conflict, how to engage conflict constructively. And so I got my master's from Portland State University with a focus on empathy, the construct of empathy. How do we catalyze it in people, in people groups as well, in order to create that kind of atmosphere that is conducive for problem solving. And then it became kind of okay, how do I and I was doing some consulting as well after I completed my master's with higher ed, in the capacity of keynote speaking or workshops around multicultural competencies, diversity, equity, and all the topics that fall under that. that line of work. And then, you know, with the consulting piece, I always felt like, hey, it's one thing to just stay on the fringes and tell people what to do. You know, you need to do this and that. It's another thing to be immersed in that environment and try to bring about change. And so, having done close to, I don't know, 15 years or so of consulting from the side,
Mm.
keynoting, workshopping, change management on the side, I was like, well, it might be time to immerse oneself into an organization and try to do the changes from within. So, and that's how I got immersed into higher ed, and doing this work now for about, you know, for 4 years. So that's a little bit about myself and the journey to here.
Well, I really enjoy hearing it because one of the things that I find really, I guess, more so interesting and really want to get your intake on it is, you know, what, I guess, in my mind, I'm trying to really formulate this. So I guess, what do you really enjoy about really the higher ed part of doing that empathy work? And do you find it to be a little bit more different than when you were consulting?
That's a good question. I think each environment has its challenges and its rewards. You know, the part about higher ed that really drew me is higher ed is very impactful when you look at society as a whole, right?
Mhm.
You know, especially in Western society in America here, you know, to get a chance for a decent living wage, you have to get a college degree. You know, the days are long gone when a high school degree warrants any sort of substantive and meaningful income, right? So folks have to go through college to get the skill set or the prerequisites to kind of work towards their vocational path. And so with that, it's always meant to me that it's a change agent or potential for change environment. And
Mhm.
so, and you have, especially when you're talking about community colleges, you have such a confluence of different walks of lives and people from different backgrounds and lived stories that uh,
Mhm.
go through the community colleges, and that it felt like that would be a good spot, a good place to really, one, create impact in the students that go through through the educational process, but then also folks who are molding those minds in understanding what differences are, how do we posture or position ourselves when facing differences, and in light of historical challenges of certain groups, how
Mhm.
to take actions to revert those trends and patterns for a more just and equitable society.
Mhm.
So I haven't found it particularly harder or more rewarding. It's just different in higher ed because you're dealing with sometimes egos. You're
Absolutely.
also dealing with bureaucracy and the political side of things. But that can be said about different industries. You know, as I did a lot of consulting, whether with even state agencies or the private sector in the past. You know, the human ego is everywhere. Politics and bureaucracy is everywhere. It looks different in different systems.
Okay. No, that's good to know because I will say, being in higher ed for a while myself, I think a lot of us who have been in it, specifically Black and brown bodies and beige bodies, um, we always, when we think about like empathy work, diversity work, trying to move forward with initiatives to really be more inclusive, right, is this idea that higher ed kind of moves at a very snail pace. So it's really good to hear from your perspective from working in consulting from the outside and then being on the inside that, a lot of it really isn't completely such a difference. Um, and so it's really good to hear that. So I just really wanted to like pin that for a moment.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Let me add to it and say it's just the process of change is difficult, right? Change is hard, and as much as I hate the sound of it, change just takes time. I like to use the analogy of just even at a personal level with, within the interpersonal dynamics with, a spouse and, a partner, or even with kids and a parent, folks don't change just because you tell them do things differently.
Right. Exactly.
My wife, there's a lot of things she wants me to work on. It's been like 15 years of relationship. Like, you got to change this, but I wish I could just turn the switch and then here we go. Parfait is a changed man, right?
Yeah.
So in the same way, we're really talking about changing attitudes, changing hearts, making people aware of the impact of certain behaviors or patterns on others, and kind of having that other-centered lens, which seems like an eternity when you are on the receiving end of the adverse impact of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the change just takes time, and as it just requires a lot of patience, a lot of grace, a lot of strategy, a lot of methodology, and how we kind of build systems and build ways to get people to shift the paradigm that they use to engage and do their work. And
Mm-hmm.
it's across the board. It doesn't matter the industry. You're talking about essentially changing hearts, and that's a hard business to be in.
I'm excited we're talking about change because first I want to actually congratulate you on your new position, and
Thank you.
of course, and the change that SPSEC has done right in implementing the new position, and so which is a great segue into really moving into your new position, how the position has come about. And I really would just like to start by, how did you feel when you got the call that the institution was moving forward? And really, what were you going through? What was your thought process? Because I mean, moving into this kind of position is a lot of responsibility, and also can be a lot to carry, and it's very heavy, right? So I really want to unpack that. Like, how did you feel? What were you thinking? By, of course, being in this kind of work for so long, regardless if you were in higher ed or not. So can you unpack that for us? Like, how did you feel? What were you thinking? Were you deciding? All of the things.
Yeah, certainly. First and foremost, I got to say that it was overwhelming.
Okay.
To begin with, it was overwhelming because that was in the midst of everything that our nation was going through, with racial tensions on the heels of the death of George Floyd and the protest. And so I was already kind of emotionally, may I say, at capacity,
Yeah.
right? Because I was engaged in the community, um, you know, and that's probably a conversation we're gonna have, a subtopic we will have, the whole idea of activism. I was engaged mostly online. Some people were out on the streets walking, which was so brave, especially in light of the pandemic that we were in the midst of. I was
Absolutely.
doing a lot of activism online, through engaging different communities around these issues and trying to raise awareness. I was kind of working overtime in addition to my regular job duties. I was just kind of at capacity, and so when the opportunity presented itself, um, I needed time to just kind of think about it,
Mm,
and I just gonna ask for some time to first recenter. I'm a person of faith, and I really had to go deep within and pray about it and see whether that's where I felt like
yeah.
the Creator wanted me to go and take on as the next chapter in my vocational path.
Yeah.
And obviously, I was humbled by it. I was humbled by the opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
um, and but felt the weight of it. In any regular time, it was pretty heavy
Yeah.
load to take on, especially as the first in that position in this institution. But then, in addition, when you compound what was happening at the macro level, it was like,
Mm-hmm.
holy cow, right? The
Yes.
expectations and everything that comes with that. But then as I processed it, it just felt right. One, because some of the foundational pieces were already in place, and what I mean by that is a lot of the work, with this kind of work, is really built on relationship building.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really about relationships. How you engage with people, knowing all the various stakeholders, their strengths, their weaknesses, their blind spots, and having institutional memory, like knowing where the institution has been, what has been successful, what hasn't, where the pressure points are, and so forth, the inflection points are. And so a lot of that had been kind of in the works for the previous 3 years in my previous job. I had built the relationships, I know all the stakeholders. There was kind of trust built as well, so we could kind of continue building on the work that was kind of started. And so a lot of that felt right, and also as the appropriate challenge for me at this stage, and just kind of a sense of, part of the role that I want to play in this time in history, and trying to help our organization move forward in the work around equity and inclusion. So
Okay.
that's kind of a little time lapse of what I went through as a process.
No, it's really good. And, and I know me and you have had this brief conversation in regards to like my experience of really being introduced to what the position does, or maybe like how it functions. And I just want to like give my first preview of like, or introduction of like what the position does. And so just for a little bit, everybody, I'm just going to just share my experience. So SPSCC is very, one of their things that I really appreciate is like the whole professional development and allowing, the campus to really participate in a lot of national conferences. And so, so I was at NCORE, and I had the opportunity to do the pre-conference, which allows you to be in a whole day to get a lot more information in regards to a particular topic or conversation. And I decided to pick the executive diversity officer pre-conference. And the reason that I did go into that particular one was because I specifically was like, okay, wow, like I'm looking to, possibly move into that direction. And I would never forget it. So when I got there, it was really a packed room. Black, brown, beige, white folk, all people were in there that really were about this work. And I remember the facilitator, it was a Black woman, wonderful. And she actually asked everyone in the audience the question of, how many people in here basically see themselves as like an activist, very grassroots focused? And, honestly, like 90% of people really raised their hand. And so the part that's so interesting was what she said after that. So what she said was, well, that's not this position. And what I find interesting is that like a lot of like the new upcoming young POCs or our white allies or our white accomplices that really want to go into this kind of work to bring about institutional change. When you hear that, it's like, well, if program coordinators or assistant directors, deans are doing a lot of activist work and trying to reshape, rebuild, dismantle institutionalized racism, and to say like activism somehow doesn't really function at the top, at the table, is a little disheartening. So I really want to hear from you. Like, how does activism really function, or really does it function? Is it depending upon either the institution or what? So I know you're new in it, so I'm really interested to get your insight on how are you implementing your activism and how does that work?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's an interesting story. Thank you for sharing it with our listeners as well. I don't see activism, especially in this context, as like a dichotomy, right? Earlier when I was kind of talking about my process, when I was offered the opportunity, and the kind of action that was engaged in during the social unrest, which obviously is still happening. I talked about how some people were on the front line, marching on the streets, and I was engaging online, right? Some people were writing articles, some people were putting resources together to help. Just, I think activism, depending on people's comfort level, one, people's skill set, two, um, and the list can go on, can look different, right?
Yeah.
And we need it all. We need all the players in order to bring about change. Even if we go back in history and we look at the civil rights movement,
Hmm.
you will have different pieces of the puzzle that kind of bring the whole together. So when I think about the executive level diversity officer work, I really look at it. It's still activism, it's advocacy work as well, but it looks different in that you're trying to bring people along, and build a coalition around, and get a buy-in around what we want to do and how we go about doing it. Relationships are critical, in just because it's one thing when you have someone doing something because they feel like they have to do it. The heart is not in it, and it's not
Hmm.
sustainable long term. It's another
Right.
thing to get people to feel like they want to do that. They want to do it, right? So
Right.
that they then get vested in it, right? And there's a lot of philosophical discussions that can be had around that compliance versus coalition building and buying. But when I
Right.
think of this role, it really is a coalition building role. One, there's a coordination piece of it where you're ensuring that the institution, and I'm going to speak for myself because
Right.
I know that, this role and the way it's operationalized will differ from who's sitting in the seat, one, and then who's at the table along the person in the seat, because the makeup and the personalities and commitment of the team that hires someone in this position will matter a lot, on how their voices are heard at the table, their suggestions are heard at the table. But as for me, just based on how I'm wired and the work that I've done up to this point, and seeing what leads to the greater buy-in to bring about change, I'm a strong believer of how do we build a coalition, work with people to see the value of what we're trying to do so that they get vested 200% rather than getting a 50%, and so that's kind of philosophically the way I see the role. So it's still advocacy, it's still activism, the same
Hmm.
principle of what are we trying to do? Yeah, we're trying to remove barriers, we're trying to create opportunities for our historically underrepresented and racialized groups, and all groups that have been on the fringes of the promise of our institution.
Right.
And so the tenets of what we're trying to do are the same, but relationships are really critical, because you're wanting to get that buy-in. And so
Okay.
for me at this institution, it's been, it's still early on, but it's been um, a great dynamic, with a lot of the ideas that have been brought. And it's not just ideas that Parfait is coming up with. We've been very methodical in having different stakeholders, interest group, listening sessions and getting ideas. And even some of the forums that we did around race within our walls were, ways for us to get ideas of what we can set up as an agenda, in order to
Hmm.
prioritize the work. Because another piece that's very important, Q, is that this work is massive and huge. I call it the proverbial elephant,
Yeah.
and you there's just this feeling like, where do I start? What do we prioritize? Because if you focus on one area, other groups feel like, what about me? What about us? Right? And so
Hmm.
we still have to be methodical about, okay, how we go about taking down this proverbial elephant. And so having kind of a game plan, an operational plan, kind of helps set kind of a roadmap. And so that's what we've done, by reaching out to different groups and hearing and having forums to kind of hear what's bubbling up to the top, and then setting up in motion a plan, that we're going to use as a roadmap.
Okay. Well, this is really good because I will just tell you my experience of being in that pre-conference kind of strayed me a little bit away because
Mm-hmm.
for me, coming from an institution, from undergrad to grad that are very activist, grassroots, protest driven for change. It was just very interesting to hear a position that's supposed to be dismantling institutionalized racism, that somehow like that position doesn't function in any kind of way of activism. Was like, well, that's a little interesting, but it's really good to hear that the way and how the change happens and the activism works is moving at a different pace, but also it's moving differently than what we think of what the position is doing. So that's really good to hear. What's also that I wanted to ask too is more of your personal experience on being the only Black person at the table, especially during these times. So, like, how are you feeling being that only Black person at the table at the top? Which does it give you a lot of? How do you feel? Because me and you've had this conversation about what it feels like for people of color and specifically Black folks, to where I don't feel like we can make any mistakes, and I just want to know what kind of internal pressure are you feeling, or if you are feeling any at all, by being the only one, right? And how is it functioning for you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. First, just from a personality standpoint, I am the never-ending perfectionist, right? And that in itself amps up the stakes. Regardless of which environment I'm in, I'm just perfectionist. And it's kind of funny. I was in the forum a few days ago, and I was talking about, man, I'm working on, just working on that perfectionism and kind of to have it lay low a little bit. And a friend of mine said, it's funny because, my name Parfait, which is from the French language, means perfect, the irony in perfect trying to lay down perfectionism. And so we cracked up a little bit. So it's kind of a curse, blessed curse, that I really strive to put my best work out there, no matter where I'm at. I'm a strong believer that even if I'm going to be sweeping the floor on the streets, I want to be known as a man who swept the floor the best, on that corner of the street. It's a work ethic that my parents have kind of put in me, and I've been raised with that, and it just has its legacy of, unreasonable expectations on myself that I take anywhere I go. So with that as a background, there's that pressure first, and then there's also personally the pressure of me being the first in this position,
yes,
right? And essentially just setting up the path for success for anybody else who will come after me, and right. So there's already just pressure, and to be honest, I don't know, if I can dissociate which one it is from just me being in the midst of awesome colleagues who are white. Versus the internal self-inflicted pressure. I just know that I feel the pressure that I need to deliver, and I feel the pressure because of the times we live in, right? Which is a heightened pressure. I feel the pressure from BIPOC folks in our community, underrepresented folks, LGBTQ plus, every marginalized group, our students. I feel the pressure because we want to make change for them. So it's just a pressure-filled role. But if I were to say something from a racial dynamic standpoint, the team has made me feel welcome. And again, it's not like I was coming from an external environment outside. That was one of the benefits that I talked about earlier. I had the benefit of having been in relationship with most of the team, right, before. So we knew each other. And so some of those initial niceties and stuff were already out the door. So there was already a relationship in place. So it's helped to make me feel more comfortable in the setting. And so just like any relationship, we spend more time, we get to know each other, but just the responses to my ideas and the way we can move the college together forward in this work has been really positive. There's a real team spirit that's happening, and willingness to hold a mirror in front of ourselves and consider ideas to move us forward.
I think that's great. And it's good to hear it. I'm interested to also, as you're sitting in as the first Black person, I really want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
What do you see? what is your vision as you're currently sitting in it for, the institution, as well as for the center where we work? Like, what is your vision? And I'm really, and we have just conversations off record, but I like hearing how your mind functions in the work of empathy and activism. So I'm interested to hear your vision of, like, this is my vision as I sit in it, right? Of what I would like to see the institution move forward to, of the diversity work, as well as the center. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Even if it's not concrete, but just maybe some things that you really want to, like, start doing or really want to tackle as much?
Yeah, no, great questions, Q. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. So I think if I could, summarize or articulate my vision in like bulleted points, I will probably just zero in on two key points.
Yeah.
One, one will be the impact that we have on our students, right? Who go through our walls.
Yeah.
What are their experiences? I really would want, through my tenure and the collective work that we will do, having been an instrumental player in helping us, harness our passion, being inspired to really impact students in a way that, when they graduate, they feel like, wow, one, if they from a marginalized group, they feel like, wow, I had a wonderful experience at SPSCC. I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was seen, I was heard, I was supported. And my hope from a quantitative standpoint that feeling translates into higher rates of success and completion for those students. And the other component related to the students in that same bullet point would be, I would want every student who goes through this college that they come out transformed, that by going through SPSCC, they get to understand that the world is not a monocultural space. The world is a diverse place, and the diversity is enriching and a beautiful thing. And so kind of the dismantling of a single narrative, white supremacist narrative, right? So that would be one. So helping our institution, through the curriculum that we teach, the ways we teach, that we highlight the diversity of our community and our world and its beauty. And then the other bullet point, which can affect, I think it applies to the entire community, but maybe more to the staff and faculty, is a work of healing and community building.
Yes.
I'm a strong believer in the construct of be the bridge. And if you obviously we're in a pandemic, and so the center is not accessible to a lot of folks, but one of the big signs we have, everybody sees it as soon as they walk into the space, is the sign be the bridge, which is a call to action to be reaching across the aisle, because our society, our communities are broken and fragmented and segregated. And so I want to have played a role in helping our community be a reflection, a fishbowl, if you will, of what we want society to look like. Where communities are interacting with each other, they're empathetic towards each other, they're supporting each other, and there's less of those silos. So if I can move us along nudge us forward in these two areas, at least in the slightest, I would feel like I have played my role in this tenure.
That's great. I'm happy to hear those 2 points. I'm also happy to hear the healing part. And I know me and you have had this conversation, and we both agree. Like, healing needs to take place, and I'm really happy to hear about the healing that needs to happen across the board, from administration to staff and faculty. I think it's really, really, really important for everyone to do their part.
Yeah.
It doesn't work one way. I think everyone needs to be a part of their own healing and healing together with whoever the individual or people are. And so my hope is people find the comfortability for themselves to tell their truth to whoever it needs to be, and hoping that that person on the other side is open to hearing it and moving forward. And so I just really, really, really appreciate that. And one of the things, and I know I've talked about this a lot, is we all serve students. We can't give students our best if we're not our best, because we're not healing with the people we work with. And so, and that energy trickles down and affects our students. And so I just really want to put that there. So great point.
Can I add to this? I know you nailed it. Thanks for amplifying that. I couldn't agree more with you, right? Healing is a two-way street, and it really requires a lot of, you call it comfortability. I will add to it like bravery, right? I'm a strong fan of Brené Brown's work around vulnerability and courage. As a community, when you are in community, there's going to be harm. There's going to be, conflict. There's going to be things that happen, and trust, wherever it's not there, it has to be rebuilt, and it takes courage and vulnerability, and open space to be able to vocalize how one is being hurt, and for folks to own, the whole conversation about intent versus impact, to own their impact, and then be able to kind of move constructively. One of the things that I've taken away from my training in conflict resolution, feels like ages ago now, right? There's a premise in the conflict management field that says the reason, the rationale for the attempt to try to manage, engage conflicts in a non-violent way is because the whole field rests on the premise that we all have a shared destiny. Right. And even more so when you're talking about a community like SPSCC, we have a shared destiny with a shared goal, which is what you talked about, serving our students. And because of that shared destiny, we are bound, we have to, figure out constructive ways to engage the hard feelings that we've had. To keep our factions, us versus them, is doing no good to no one, right? And so I guess my call and the work that we've been trying to do with creating forums where conversations can happen is to help kind of nudge us in that direction. If there's things that are sitting not so well with folks and things that have happened in the past, to really, muster that initiative, to engage those folks and have a conversation. There's so much transformation that happens by engaging those we have a perceived or real conflict with. So, and that will help us towards that healing piece.
I think it's great. And, we've had this conversation around just not everybody, but, white folk, and our BIPOC folk, right, who have this uncomfortability of the administration, right, and just the trauma, the negative experiences. And my hope is really the work that me and you do together, alongside of everyone who is a part of that, really thinking about, like, how do we create a space for truths to be spoken? Because I feel like, in my opinion, if it takes only two people to do it, right, to really move it in the forward for other people to feel hopefully comfortable to start that healing process. You know what I mean? And I know that it can be a little difficult, depending on who it is, right? And if people feel comfortable talking to the person themselves, if it's someone who is in financial aid or One Stop or advising or whatever, and having issues or a disagreement or a dislike or feeling hurt by someone that sits at the table you sit at, or maybe their own supervisor, that could be a director or a dean or whatever. What would you say to someone that, how do they get the courage to really do that? Or I guess, what do you think from your lens of doing a lot of empathy and training and conflict resolution? Like, how does that conversation start with them?
Yeah, it's hard because each case is so unique, right?
Yeah.
And you have to consider, people's perceived sense of either threat or whether
Yeah.
there's going to be retaliation and all those things. Those are
Yeah.
real things that people can feel.
Yes.
But in my years of doing this work and consulting and partnering with folks who are even much brighter and smarter than me in this line of work, it always goes back to the idea of the risk that comes with vulnerability and courage, and and the power of storytelling.
Mm,
There's something so transformative when someone comes into a space and put their guards down and said, I really want to have a heart to heart, human to human conversation, and this is how I have experienced this interaction or our relationship. This is the impact on me, using what I call I statements. This is how I was made to feel. This is how it impacted me. Um, and my goal, my hope is that we can really have a better relationship going forward, and that's why I'm engaging this conversation. Because when I've caused impact and I don't know that I've caused impact, I don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. So
yeah.
if we've had many conversations, you and I,
Yeah.
me, about, until you made me aware of how I've caused impact and how you would rather me engage with you in the future, I'm operating
Yes.
in a blind spot. And so I would love that opportunity, right? And personally, I operate from that lens too, that if someone causes something to me, I want to give them a chance to know that there's been that impact on me, so that
Yes.
they can have a chance to redeem themselves, own it, and for us to, build forward with better foundation. And
Yes.
so, a lot of sharing your story, the I statement, this is how it made me feel. All those are tools that can help with a healthy conversation. And obviously on the other side is, if someone approaches you and say, hey, you made them feel a certain kind of way, just own it.
Yeah.
Just own it.
Yeah.
Just own it, and then kind of, try to build from there, because it takes a lot of courage, a lot of vulnerability for someone to open up about how they've been impacted. Um, and then extending grace to each other and realize that we're all here. We're all on this journey called life, and we're trying to make a difference for our students. And,
Yes.
and I really believe that, a lot of the folks who work in this institution, we hire really good people with good hearts.
We
I
do.
really believe that. I've been in so
Yes.
many communities. I'm always astounded by, people I work with, how smart folks are, their hearts. And so I want us to not forget that. And just the business, the enterprise of living life is just messy and causes harm because we're different in our own
Yes.
socialization's path. But remembering that and giving that benefit of the doubt and going at the table and sharing one's hurt in order to give a chance for someone to know so that they can do better next time is the only key towards healing and community building.
I think that's really good. I think you kind of touching on some things you said earlier, which is, really tapping into that vulnerability piece, right? Where you were talking about Brene Brown. Um, it's vulnerable to tell your truth, and you feel exposed and naked. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think it is difficult for some people to um, tell their truths, regardless of who it might be with, and hoping, of course, that, like you said, those things of retaliation and so forth, that hopefully that doesn't happen. But I'm happy that you were able to at least give some sort of tips to people, especially not just people that are supervisors and at the top, but people that don't, right? And so This is just really, 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 really good information. I want to, before we close out, I really would like to give you the opportunity to just talk about, the new book. Um, I don't like to call it a book club. I don't know. It sounds very like, I hate to say, like, book club sounds very like suburb white
Yeah.
situation. Not to say it don't happen in, our community
Yeah.
color, but
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. But I do want to also allow you to talk a little bit about what was your initial idea and the institution goal to continue to do the race within our walls and any other things you see coming to the institution.
Yeah. Yeah. This is good. Thanks for the opportunity to plug a few things and kind of unpack some of the
Yeah.
things that have been happening and situate them in light of our broader goals. So the from the very minute, if you will, that the protests the protests that started happening in the nation, there were already some kind of transitions happening here at the college campus, and then there was an influx of emails and ideas that were coming saying, we need
Okay.
to do that because people wanted to be involved. And so I've always looked at this work from the lens of, again, the proverbial elephant. It's a huge
Yes.
thing. And in order to move the work forward, you know, and recognizing that we are all wired differently, we all have different sensibilities, we all have different passions, that certain initiatives will resonate more with certain folks and others with others, right? And so it's
Mhm.
in the creativity and having as many strategies, if you will, to eat at this elephant that we're gonna move forward. And so the book idea was actually one that came from Robert Lane.
Oh, very good.
Love Robert from Student Life. It's like, this is this great book right now, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, it'd be nice to get a coalition around that and read that book with the aim of first, education, awareness, and then action taking around the book and the lessons learned and how to apply it in our own what I call liminal spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, the goal of that one particular strategy is there's a lot of nuggets and good stuff in that book, even just from a sense of shared vocabulary and semantics around this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we have a good group of folks coming, and we're gonna. I think we have, if my memory serves me well, we have divided the book in three sections, kind of evenly divided the chapters, and then we're meeting and having conversation about what has been impactful, what resonated, what was challenging, and then the very last session we'll kind of talk about what now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one strategy to continue that awareness building, raising around issues of racism and dismantling racism in our institution. In tandem with that, and again, those are not the only things, but in tandem with that, right, we've had the race within our walls that I touched on a little bit during our talk today,
Yeah.
which was an attempt first to hear from Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, folks who have experience at college, either as students or staff or faculty, to share with us what their experience has been. One, to inform our greatest consciousness about, hey, folks are experiencing this space differently, so what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
Awareness is really important. And then two, it helps inform some of the items on the diversity operational plan on
Mm-hmm.
what we can do moving forward. And so we're going to continue those again. And I want to put it out there that, yes, the construct was around race, but it's not so much race just as a black, just solely
Mm-hmm.
that, but we
Mm-hmm.
want to continue the conversation and broaden it in terms of, how are we advancing equity for minoritized groups on our campus, and our brothers and sisters, Asian Americans and Asians in our country right now are going through a lot because of all the stigma and stereotype around, Asian that has been amplified by, this administration around the pandemic and what they've called the with the coronavirus and calling it the China virus, and what the impact has been on the Asian community. I was just reading an article about how close to 2,834 reported hate crimes directed at the Asian community so far this year, and that's crazy, right?
Yeah,
And so how do and so what are the ways in which we're supporting our Asian community in our midst, right? So the conversation is beyond just Blackness. It's really about how do we dismantle systems of supremacy, white supremacy, or if you look at the agent lens through sexuality or through able-bodiedness, right? And the list goes on. How do we start centering the experience of the most vulnerable as a way to inform how we interact, how we build service delivery models? And so those are two things that we're doing. But in addition to that, coming in the next couple of weeks, I certainly want to make people aware of the fact that we're going to have an expert in conflict resolution from Portland State University. Who will be conducting a number of workshops. Some of one for faculty. So there's going to be a series of three-part series for faculty starting this Thursday, and then happening the following Thursday, and then the following Thursday. So 3 of them to provide tools, how to navigate these tensions, especially racial tensions that are seeping into the classroom at a rate never seen before. Especially as we are approaching the elections, right? And so to provide tools to faculty to help to support them. And then we're going to have the same consultant come, I believe next week, we're still finalizing the details, come and provide a similar training for staff, because we all need some of those tools as we try to navigate these uncertain times. And then on November 5th, after the election, God knows, there's going to be a lot of emotions, and so we want to offer our college community, and communications will come out very shortly. We want to offer a space to process emotions, how people are doing, and how, in light of our shared destiny, how do we respond? How do we move forward? No matter how much we know then or little we know then, so those are some of the things in the pressure cooker in the immediate that are coming, just to help towards, those 2 bullet points that I mentioned, because those things will help us serve our students better, and then will help us heal and build community together.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for honestly spending time to really talk about this, because I would like to joke with him. Like, I feel like he get more time with the executives than me. I'm a little jealous, but
no, I got love for you, brother.
I'm like, dang, they get almost a whole day. So, but no, I always joke with him. But no, this has been really good. It's actually been very refreshing and enlightening. It's specifically for myself, and I'm hoping for those that are actually listening to really, really get to know you more, get to know your vision, and honestly get to know more about like the work that the institution is really willing and open and wanting to do, right? So, which is really, really good. So I like to always leave out this with a quote. That's just my go-to. And so today's quote is, when you look a thing dead in the eye, acknowledge that it exists, call it exactly what it is, and decide what role it will take in your life. Then, my beloved, you have taken the first step toward your freedom. And that's by Iyanla Vanzant, one of my favorite life-changing spiritual life coaches. I think we're in a time of calling things what they are and moving toward healing and transformation. So I leave us with that. And I want to say thank you to Parfait for being here. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. And look forward to more episodes.
Absolutely. Well, folks, tune in next week. where we will be talking a little bit more about the importance of voting and voter suppression. Thank you for tuning into the Unheard Outsider. I'm your host, Q, and we will see you next week.